On the 11th of October 2000, the body of Reggie Kray made the long journey through the East End of London to its final resting place. Thousands of mourners lined the streets to pay their respects to a man whose reign of terror, alongside twin brother Ronnie, ended some 30 years earlier when they were imprisoned for murder. But why were two convicted killers so revered by the British public? Who were the real Krays? This film offers unprecedented access to their trusted friends, loyal confidants, and most bitter enemies. Silences will be broken. With their dark, brooding looks and violent temperaments, twins Ronald and Reginald Kray became notorious early in life. Alongside older brother Charlie, the boys' upbringing was typical of working-class London. But this was no ordinary family. These boys were destined to stand out. Maureen Flanagan, former actress and one of Britain's first Page 3 girls, first met the Kray family when she was just 17.
1961. Well, London was buzzing, swinging 60s was just beginning, everything was changing, fashion, politics, we had the pill. Some women were going out to work, like me, and it was a very busy area, most respectful, and that's when I met the Notorious Kray family.
When I was about 19, come out of prison, I was young then, I knew their father, and sometimes I'd go home with the Krays, their father, rather than them, and they were back from evacuation, Reggie and Ronnie. They was only about 9 years of age, and they used to call me Uncle Frank.
I met Charlie, the elder brother. He was the elder by 7 years from the twins. I met him first, found him most handsome and charming. Then he introduced me to his mother at their house in Valence Road. He said she wanted someone to come home and do her hair every week, rather than sit in a salon and be inundated with requests, which she always was. So along I went, I met this charming, lovely, kind, typical East End mother, who just happened to be the mother of the most notorious men in London.
I saw this woman in Bethnal Green Road in shopping bags, and I said, "Old lady, can I give you a hand?" She said, "Oh, would you, son?" So anyway, she lived in Valence Road. I didn't know who she was. When I got to her doorstep, I went to give her the bag, said, "Come and have a cup of tea." I couldn't believe it. Two geezers in there, you couldn't tell them apart. That was Ronnie and Reggie.
I found Mrs. Kray, Violet, a wonderful child. I had an affinity with her the minute I met her. I knew I'd have a friend for life. Typical mother who loved and adored the sons. Mr. Kray, who I always called Mr. Kray, I never called Charles the whole years I met him, I found him quite a withdrawn, miserable man, but then he wasn't there very often. Hence, no authority, no fatherly authority in the house.
Was there much between Ronnie or Reggie?
No, they were about same as most brothers, you know, they'd have their arguments and one thing now and again. But otherwise, they were okay, yeah.
Okay is not how the other children of Bethnal Green remember the terrible twins. Those that somehow offended Ronnie and Reggie were beaten mercilessly. The twins' grandfather recognised their lust for violence and urged them to channel their vicious energy into the noble art of boxing. As former friend and true crime author Bernard O'Mahony explains.
This is the famous Repton Boxing Club, where all three Kray brothers came to learn their trade. They were influenced by their grandfather, Cannonball Lee, himself a proficient boxer.
Well, I thought Reggie was a really good fighter. I think he could have been a champion. What used to happen was, started in the school playground, having little scraps, chinning people, and then after that, in the street, chinning people.
I think they were destined, from little boys, to be leaders. She spoilt them terribly. What they wanted, they had, and then they grew up and they thought what they saw, what they wanted, they took.
Demanding, devious and dangerous, The twins did indeed commandeer whatever they wanted, whether it was money, material items, or manpower. Eddie Richardson and Frank Fraser of the rival gang the Richardsons knew the twins and their firm all too well.
It was a mixture of fear and respect. Respect because women and children, untouchable. Ordinary guys who went to work and that, untouchable. Any rows we had was only amongst ourselves. And if we hurt or killed one another, so what?
They was violent, yeah. I mean, in their own little way, I suppose, they was violent, yeah. So was we, wasn't we? So, you know.
But that didn't worry you and your brother, no?
Never. I tell you that if they put me and my brother in a cell with them two, there's only two people coming out, that's me and my brother. They wanted to be gangsters. They set out to be gangsters.
I was invited to go around the house one day, and I went down there, and they're all sitting, the twins and Charlie sitting there. And then Charlie stood up and he said, "Welcome to the firm," like some fucking board meeting. And he said, "We want you on our firm to earn money with us."
I was with them on and off for about 20 odd years.
What sort of work did you do for them?
I just mainly drive them about and be with them in general, you know. I used to live with Reggie and Ronnie. All of us, three of us used to live there, four of us used to live there first.
In 1956, Ronnie Kray had begun to display the early signs of a man suffering from mental illness. He shot a man for little or no reason and severely beat another, for which he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. On Christmas Day 1957, Ronnie's beloved Aunt Rose died and he suffered a complete breakdown. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and returned to Long Grove Asylum near Epsom, a secure mental facility. Reggie saw this as an ideal opportunity to free his identical twin.
What decided me to get Ron away from Long Grove Nuthouse in Epsom was some of the stories he told me about the place. One day he was sitting there eating an apple and this nutter come along and smacked him in the eye. Because he retaliated just because he was eating an apple. Because the place was full of nutters.
Against all odds, Reggie did indeed manage to free his brother. In the meantime, a long-term associate of the firm named Freddie Foreman had been given a place to live by the twins. He had inadvertently become indebted to them, something he would later come to regret.
And I stayed in Ronnie Kray's flat when he'd escaped from Epsom, the mental place.
Oh, right, yeah.
And he was holed up in his flat, and they gave me his flat to live in. And I got my wife and kids over there. They went to school over there. And that's how I come to live in the East End and got to know the Kray family very well. I never trusted Reggie. I thought he sat on the fence and he would go whatever way suited him, whereas Ronnie was more, if he gave his word, he would stick to his word. He was the nuttiest one of the two.
He was a very, very scary man. Believe me, I had met a lot of scary people, but Ronnie Kray was a very, very sick, psychopathical, schizophrenia, and manic depressive, all rolled in one word of his mouth. He meant everything he said.
He wasn't right in the head. He definitely wasn't right in the head.
After Ronnie had been returned to custody, a notorious landlord named Peter Rackman was approached by Reggie Kray, who demanded protection money. Rackman was notorious for bullying and exploiting his tenants, but he was no match for Reggie. In an effort to pacify Kray, he offered to sell him a West End nightclub for a nominal fee. Things went well initially, but then Ronnie was released.
I was there on the meeting when they took it over, but they took the East End to Knightsbridge. You know, all them ugly-looking bastards with their cuts down their faces and all that, and flat noses, and they should have left the club as it was and run it as without it, and just sat back and collected the debts that was owed. That's all they needed to do. But of course they ruined the place, like they ruined every fucking thing, you know. Anyway, every club they had, the business they had, they ruined it with the clientele they used to take down there.
I'd see people laughing and having a good time 5 minutes before he walked through the door. The minute he walked through the door, that laughter stopped. The conversation dimmed. People were terrified that he would say, "Are you laughing at me?" And then he had that paranoid feeling that they were laughing at him, and then there'd be a bloodbath.
Random acts of violence were part and parcel of Ronnie Kray's disturbing world. Lenny Hamilton, jewel thief and longtime friend of the family, suffered a terrible ordeal after a dispute with a man whose father knew the Krays.
Andy come home and he said, "Len, Ronnie wants to see you up the club." I thought, well, I ain't done nothing to him, like, you know. And I was going in and out their house and that, like, as a friend. So I go up there, get a cab, black cab, and go up there. They show me in the kitchen, and Ronnie was standing with his back to the, I didn't know, but it was a gas stove. Then he told two fellas to get hold of me, and they got hold of me, like, and that's when I see the pokers on the gas. He said, "Now I'm going to burn your fucking eyes out." And as he's coming towards me, someone shouted out, "No, Ron, not that." And he just stopped. As he walked away too, I said, "You can go now."
In July 1964, the Sunday Mirror published a story about Ronnie being involved in a sleazy sexual relationship with a Conservative politician named Lord Boothby. After the twins threatened the journalist involved and Boothby threatened to sue, the newspaper backed down. It sacked the editor, printed an apology, and paid Boothby £40,000. A friend of Ronnie Kray named Toby Von Judge, the son of a High Court judge, knew the allegations about Kray, Boothby and young men were true, and so he confronted the peer.
I said, "Tell me something. What sort of a man like you can come to somebody like Ronnie and demand your boys?" He said, "I beg your pardon." I said, "I've asked you a straightforward question, your lordship, or whatever you are." "Oh, it's none of your concern." He kept on saying it was none of my concern, and this really got up my nose. "What are you doing with a person like Ronnie Kray?" And then Ronnie butted in. He said, "Toby, that's enough. He's a friend. He does me favors. That's it. No more questions." So I left it at that. He left rather quickly.
Ronnie Kray and Lord Boothby were not the only ones enjoying the sexual revolution of the promiscuous swinging 60s. Freddie Foreman's brother George was having an affair with the wife of an East End villain named Jimmy Evans. When he learned of his wife's adultery, Evans and an associate named Tommy Ginger Marks decided to shoot George.
All I knew was someone come round to me and got the message that George was in hospital, in St Thomas's Hospital, and someone had shot him on his doorstep while he was having a meal with his wife and kids. Ginger knocked at the door, he went and answered the door, and then someone stepped out of the shadows with a shotgun and blasted him in the lower area, caught him in the top of the leg. He was lucky in that respect. And of course, I'll go to the hospital, and the police stay on the bed, and they went and had a cigarette, and now over it, and he just whispered Ginger Tom, and that's the only name I had. Well, the twins knew everyone in the East End, so when I went to see the twins, they told me who Ginger Tom was, you know, and so that was Tommy Marks. By then I found out through that who the other fellow was. I didn't know about the relationship he was having with this girl. I had no idea he'd been carrying on with somebody else's wife, you see. So that was something that was a shock to me. And naturally, I had to take revenge, you know.
So they pulled on him one day in Cheshire Street, and they ordered that Jim. They wanted Jimmy Evans, but Ginger Marks turned around thinking he'd called Gin. And they shot Ginger Marks, dragged him in the motor and whipped him off. And that was the last I saw of him.
Somehow, amongst all of the bloodletting and hatred, Reggie Kray found love. Initially, his heart was stolen by a young man. But when he rejected his advances, he started a relationship with the man's sister, a beautiful young girl named Frances Shay.
Reggie knew Frances, I think, from the age about 14. But first of all, he knew her brother. And I think probably would have had an affair with the brother first, had it been consented, but the brother didn't want to know. And then he'd met the sister, who was equally beautiful, and started this love affair. At last, he'd found somebody, Reggie, that he really, really fell in love with. He adored her, and Ronnie absolutely hated that. And he had no intentions, or so he thought at the time, to let this marriage go ahead, and he did everything in his power to stop this marriage. Very jealous of Frances, he was. But eventually, the marriage did take place, but he never liked Frances, ever, Ronnie.
11 months after the wedding, Kray firm member Richard "Dickie" Hart was shot dead at a nightclub called Mr. Smith's in South London. Eddie Richardson, Mad Frankie Fraser, and other members of the Krays' rival gang, the Richardsons, were said to be involved. Ronnie Kray's moment had arrived. He was going to teach the Richardson gang and everybody else that they shouldn't mess with him or his firm.
I don't know, it was sort of underlying rivalry. We never actually clashed in any way, you know. I had 6 betting shops, you know, betting offices. And one of these young guys, he was only 20, Kenny Hampton, he got bashed up down in the toilets for no reason or other. They kicked the shit out of him. I find out that Eddie and Fraser and them had done, and the rest of the firm. My brother George had the Red Sail Club up at Clapham Common, and they were all down there, and George rang me, he said, well, they're all downstairs. And so I went down there, and I was very angry, and I only went with one person, Ronnie King, and they was all in a group, and I went over and I pulled them. I pulled Eddie about it, and I stuck this 38 up his nostril, you know, up his nose.
Someone from up north, through Billy Hill actually, and he got in touch with Billy, and then they put us in touch to put a couple of people on the door in the club. To, you know, so that's what we was going to do. We went over there and was unaware that other things had been going on.
I walked up to Dickie. I said, what you doing? He's gone, a Luger. I said, a Luger, it was a Luger. He said, Jim, it's going to be war tonight. He said, I said, Dick, I said, don't be silly. Took the gun off him, put it in the girl's bag that I was with, right? Then boom, everything else happened. Then Dickie Hart, somehow or other, he got the gun.
Anyway, they had 2 guns. We never had no guns. And then one of them wanted to have a fight with me. We had a fight on the dance floor. Right? I'd done him on the dance floor, set astride of him. I wanted to really punch his head through the fucking floorboard, to be quite honest. But I was wanting to get shot in the back. Then there was a bit of movement from outside, and that's when Dickie Hart lost his gun, and he got one from the gun, but he didn't survive it.
And all of a sudden the phone went. I went, hello, it's Ted. He went, Jim, Dickie Hart's dead, got killed. I said, oh, I'll see you in the morning. I thought, God, oh, that was it.
Eddie and Fraser and all the rest of the firm had been down there, and it kicked off. About 4 people had been shot, you know.
Ronnie Jeffries got shot, I got shot, Fraser got shot, Harry Rawlins got shot.
And of course that was like an open warfare now. It was sort of, that was the beginning of all the trouble.
The night after Dickie Hart's murder, Ronnie Kray heard that George Cornell was drinking in the Blind Beggar pub. He summoned his friend Ian Barry, and as they entered the premises, Barry fired 2 shots into the ceiling. Ronnie saw Cornell at the bar, and as he approached him, Cornell said, "Look who's here." But Ronnie didn't answer. He pulled out a Luger and shot Cornell through the forehead. Cornell slumped forward and eventually fell to the floor, where he died moments later.
Georgie CORNELL was from East London, and he'd gone over to South London to join up with the Richardson firm. So they felt that he'd changed his loyalties from east to south. Ronnie Kray used to get the hump with people for very little reason, you know. He didn't need a lot of excuses to get the hump with people. And this was a bad thing about him because of his mental state, you know. He wasn't a well person, he wasn't well at all.
On the 12th of December 1966, Frank Mitchell was sprung from Dartmoor prison and brought to this flat on Barking Road.
Frank Mitchell was a product of the environment. He stole a bike when he was a little kid, and his father, instead of going round to the person's house and saying, look, my son's just nicked your boy's bike, here's his bike back, he didn't do that. He took him to the police station. He got the kid in juvenile court.
Mitchell started off when he was a 16-year-old kid. He stole a push bike. He got nicked for that. And then he went through the system, Borstal. If a screw said something to him, he chinned him, and that was it.
Ronnie Kray got friendly with him in Wandsworth, and he used to send visitors in, give him money in, and look after him. And because he wound up in Rampton for the criminal insane, and he was a handful for the prison system, and with attacking and screws and other prisoners. And I know he stabbed Bruce Reynolds in Worm and Scrubs in the bathhouse, which I never forgot. I remember. Yeah, Bruce was good. He was a great pal of mine, Bruce. And I was when I heard about that, I wasn't happy about that anyway. So Ronnie, with all his connections and his political connections with these different people, Boothby and Co. and Dryberg and all that activities that were going on, he thought he could pull a few strings, and if he got Mitchell out, he would be able to get him a release date, and if he handed himself in after 6 months and behaved himself and never got in any trouble.
Frankie was a very tough geezer, but he wasn't a liberty taker.
He thought he could go out and club it out and put himself on the firm and go and do all sorts of villainy with the twins and be their right-hand man, and, you know, in his mentality. And of course he couldn't do none of those things. All he could do was exchange one prisoner for another, really.
Unfortunately, Mitchell, who was an absolutely huge man, had a lot of demands. He wanted a woman. The Krays brought him a woman. He wanted food, ridiculous amounts. They were bringing him food, alcohol.
So they did everything to keep him quiet, got him an hostess and some sex and things like that. And tried their best to keep him sweet, and then the idea was to smuggle him out abroad, you know, to get him to Australia or Spain or somewhere where he could live the rest of his life. And I had the facilities to do that because I'd got people out the country previous, you know, train robbers out the country. I managed to do that, you know. He got too much for them. I mean, they couldn't handle him. They was fucking had minders around there looking after him 24 hours 7.
He's in a flat in Barking?
Yeah, yeah. The bird was all right to start with because he's a handsome man, a good figure, and a physique. But now that you realise what he really is like, you know.
Eventually he started saying, I want to get out, I want to go and walk around the streets. And he became an absolute headache for the twins. So, as the twins did, they decided any sort of headache, they were going to kill him.
So they had minders looking after him day and night, and they was all terrified and shit scared of him. And they was complaining all the time. And so they got me over, asked me to come over, and I went to see Reggie and Charlie, and they said, can you get us out of trouble here and help us? And they had rings under their eyes, and he threatened to go round and take their mother hostage, and he knew what to blame and he would take 6 coppers with him. If it was the police turned up, he would shoot his way out.
The Krays had always been keen to learn how Foreman managed to dispose of Ginger Marks's body, because back in the 1960s, the police worked largely on the assumption that if there wasn't a body, then there hadn't been a murder. However, Foreman refused to disclose his darkest secret, a decision which led him to be called upon to dispose of bodies on more than one occasion.
So now they're really worried now. So now they've got to get some help from somewhere, and they come to me again. So I'll go over and see him, and so I've made arrangements to pick him up and take him out of the country.
On the night of Christmas Eve 1966, Albert Donahue was in the flat with Frank, and some men came to the door and said, you know, we're going to take you to see the twins. The girl will have to stay here, but you come with us. So Albert walked out of the flat with Frank. He said goodbye to the girl, and they went out through that door into the street.
My job is to get Frank out of the flat and into the van. He's got his girlfriend, so it was easy because I could say to him, you know Ronnie won't have women around him, so what we do, we take you, Frank, and then I'll bring the girl along afterwards and follow up. He's supposed to spend a fortnight down in Kent somewhere.
After leaving the flat, Albert Donahue and Frank Mitchell walked around the corner to Ladysmith Avenue.
And a young copper come round the corner. And Frank, I felt him tense up now. I said, turn it in, Frank.
Parked on the curbside was an old commerce-style van. The back doors were open, and inside sat Freddie Foreman and another man named Alfie Gerard. They motioned for Mitchell to get into the vehicle, and he sat on the wheel casing.
There was a small partition between the back of the van and the cab. So I sat down, and then Gerard Callahan has shut the back doors, and he walked round and got in the passenger seat and slammed the passenger door. I didn't know till later. When he slammed that passenger door, that was the signal that everything's all right. That is when the guns opened up.
A fella called Donahue brought him out and walked him round and put him in the back, climbed in the van with him, and he should never climbed in the van, but he did.
I had Alfie Gerard sitting next to me, and the next one was Freddie Foreman.
The people in the flat heard the gunshots going off, you know, they heard the shots going off. So it was car backfiring and all that, and the girl panicked, and they panicked, and everybody panicked.
I was pumping shots into him, and he was groaning. It wasn't dead. I didn't kill him. And then Gerard said, go on, Fred, give him another one, I'm empty. I was pleased to hear at least one of the guns is empty. Foreman's put his gun muzzle behind his ear and going down. That was the final shot.
But the twins wanted him out, didn't they? And they got him out. And look what they done to him.
The girl was getting a bit excited. And I phoned Reggie and said, that dog won. She said, I said, the dog is dead, but I said, the dog won. That was to tell Reggie that Mitchell was off the plot, you know.
The phone call went through, and Reggie Kray said Donahue said that dog has won, you know, which was to say that everything was okay, you know. That was the sort of code message.
Frank Mitchell has never been seen since.
Following the disappearance of Frank Mitchell, Reggie Kray's wife, Frances, was becoming less of the starry-eyed young girl she once was. She was his missus, his property. The pressure this caused led to rows between the couple which became hideously abusive. Eventually, Frances had packed her bags and returned to her parents' home. In the summer of 1967, Reggie and his wife were reunited and planning a holiday, but before that could happen, Frances was found dead in her bed. She was just 23 years old.
I think the person that murdered Frances, and I'm sorry to say this, but categorizing the times that I've spent with her, and this will be a shock to everybody, but it was a no-nonsense effort because Frances got pregnant. Nobody knows that, but I do. She had what they called bulimia and was a very manic depressive. She didn't like Ronnie in any way, shape or form. But I think maybe the mother had something to do with Frances's death. Not Reggie, he loved her too much. Ronnie tolerated her because it kept him stable.
Mrs. Kray could never have treated her badly. And as for this ridiculous notion that Ronnie had anything to do with her death, I would dispute that to my dying day, because although he didn't like her, he would never have harmed her in any way, because Reggie would never have forgiven him.
I don't think Violet Kray liked Frances whatsoever. She was jealous of her because she was losing one of her babies. And they were going out more. They were going to the seaside, they went to Spain. Ronnie wouldn't let him go on his own because he was frightened she might take him away. He was jealous. He was so jealous of her.
When she committed suicide, I mean, we saw a completely different Reg. He was untidy, unshaven, which was totally, you know, the opposite to what they really were.
The death of his wife Frances undoubtedly had a devastating effect upon Reggie. Everybody who knew him says that he became a dishevelled drunk. The Kray empire had begun to crumble. 4 months after Frances's death, Reggie stabbed a man to death in a drunken rage.
Ronnie was always screaming at Reggie, "It's your turn, you coward, why don't you do your, I don't mind, you know."
On the night after it, the funeral, he was in the Regency having a drink, getting rotten drunk, and Jack the Hat came round to shoot any one of the Kray brothers.
He came in the Regency one night, supposed to have had a shotgun. He said, "If any of the firm in the old blood are fucking away."
Well, Reggie was just sitting inside there, up at the bar, on rotten drunk at the time. So he had a very narrow escape then. And so to me, that a week later, they found out what happened, and that's the reason they murdered Jack the Hat. Well, they give him money to go and shoot this guy, Leslie Payne, a fella called Payne, who worked for them. He took the money and drank it all and bought pills with it or whatever he did with it, but he never did what he was supposed to do.
The twins were clearly upset with MCVITIE, so on October the 29th, 1967, they invited him to this house where there was it was just a local house party going on, and prior to his arrival, the twins turned up, told the host to get rid of all the guests. They waited down in the room in the basement, and a couple of other members of their firm were on the stairs. MCVITIE arrived, he was very drunk, been popping pills all night, so wasn't really, you know, with it.
The Lambriano brothers took him to this party, and when they got him down there, they just fucking challenged him and finished up stabbing him to death.
Ronnie got him in a bear hug and he was saying to Reggie, do him, I've done mine, you do yours.
Bender got a knife from the kitchen, one of them fucking kitchen carving knives, you know, and he just started stabbing him in the head, the face, stomach, everywhere.
MCVITIE fell to the floor and Reggie continued stabbing him, and in the end he impaled him on the floor by sticking the knife through his throat into the floorboards.
It was a messy, really messy job, what they did of him anyway. It took a long time to kill him, apparently. It was a bad scene.
Following the murder, Jack MCVITIE's body was loaded into Tony Lambriano's vehicle. It was brought here to this street in Rotherhithe and left outside St Mary's Church. The following morning, they contacted Freddie Foreman and asked him to deal with it.
Well, they took him across and dumped him right on my fucking doorstep, round the corner from my pub, and left him there in the back of a car.
Every single aspect of the Krays' lives are surrounded by conspiracy theories and myths. In the late 1960s, this flyover was being constructed, and many believe that the bodies of Jack the Hat, Frank Mitchell, and Ginger Marks ended up being buried here beneath the foundations.
Tony Lambriano did drive the body away with his brother behind him in another car, all the way to South London, parked outside 3, 4 o'clock in the morning outside a little church. Fred was told to pick it up, take it away, and he always claims that went to sea, which is quite feasible to me. I've heard all the bow flyover stories and buried in different graves. There was a man that could melt down stuff, the smelter. I think he took care of another 2 bodies. But I do know the Jack the Hat story, the being out to sea, was the correct one. And they've told me that, the twins and who drove him there.
They used to have a pole. We had couple of breakers yards. You had one over the water.
Oh, that's right. You did
And you
tell me.
had one at Dartford. He used to break lorries up, smelt Ellie, and he had a big aluminium smelt. And what he used to do, he used to have an old chest freezer. He used to put them in there, then he'd cut them up and put them in the smelt.
Only a small number of Freddie Foreman's closest confidants know what really happened to the bodies of Marks, Mitchell and MCVITIE. Even the Krays were not privy to such sensitive information. Despite the no body, no murder assumption, they arrested the Kray brothers and their associates on the 8th of May 1968. Several gang members gave evidence against the twins after they were told that they would have to take the blame for the murders. Ron and Reg Kray were eventually sentenced to life imprisonment, with a recommendation that they serve at least 30 years. Charlie Kray and Freddie Foreman were both in prison for 10 years for being accessories in Jack McVitie's murder.
Anyway, I went on a solicitor's visit. Now it's me and the 3 Krays sitting there. And that's when Ronnie said, he's got an idea. He said, we're going to get Ronnie out to stand up for McVitie. We're going to get Scotch Jack to stand up for CORNELL. We want you to stand up for Mitchell. I said, no, I'm not doing that. Poor way he fucking looked at me. He wouldn't have needed it at all. I would drop dead on the spot the way he looked at me. He thought, what he thought was that we were frightened, still frightened of him, you know. We were still frightened of the Krays, but it was me, Ronnie Hart and Jack Dixon, Scotch Jack. We weren't frightened of him. So that was when my mother came to visit me with my youngest son, who was a baby at the time. And I slipped in his little note. Tell Nip, get to Nipper Reed from Bow Street, tell him if he wants the business, come and see me. And he came in.
I sat next to Violet Kray at the trial on a couple of occasions, and as the witnesses were going into the box and informing on them now that they were incarcerated, Nipper Reed had got to the witnesses and they were all informing. She was turning to me and saying, why are these people telling these lies?
The screws took them down, and then we all went in our cells. Then the next thing, the doors opened and the screw and the two coppers off the Sweeney said, come on. We went and stood at the bottom of the stairs, and the judge was peeling up the sentences. Ronald Kray, society has earned the right to arrest from your activity. You'll go to prison for a minimum of 30 years. Reginald Kray saying, well, Donaghy, 2 years. I was shocked myself.
Well, at first when they were sentenced, he was never treated for this paranoid schizophrenia. So of course he went to an ordinary prison, Ronnie Kray, which should never have happened. He should have really gone straight to Broadmoor, where he could be treated. They were fine until he got to Broadmoor, and then he wanted to live exactly inside as he'd lived outside. When I saw him in Broadmoor, incredible. You'd think he was a Harley Street psychiatrist. Beautiful Italian silk suit, silk white shirt, double R cufflinks in gold, the beautiful Rolex watch, shoes you could have put your makeup on in, that shine, absolutely, horn-rimmed glasses, which he changed every year. I used to have to take a tailor in there every year to measure him up for suits. Nobody could believe it.
The Krays did their sorry best to live their lives in prison, whilst clinging to a name and reputation that was being diluted by each and every embarrassing charade that was being carried out by their minions. The press began to humiliate the twins, and many former firm members began to publicly ridicule them. Ronnie, whose name meant everything to him, was spared the worst of the criticism when he passed away in March 1995.
I'd been to Broadmoor about 2 weeks before he died, and he looked very pale and a little bit dishevelled, which was very unusual. And I asked him, I said, have you changed your medication? I literally heard it on the news, and I spoke to several people in the East End. They said, yeah, it's true. And then I was phoned by Reggie the following day saying, I want you to do the seating in the church. He's going to be buried like he always wants to, like a king.
The Krays had made many enemies during their reign, and now Ronnie was dead. Reggie was feeling vulnerable. Fearing attack, he asked Bernard O'Mahony and Dave Courtney to protect him at his brother's funeral.
But I'd like you to be there with a couple of people.
Okay, then I'll bring you.
What I'd like you to do is be close to me and Charlie, and you keep your eyes open so we can concentrate on the service.
Okay.
Stick close to me and watch anyone with dodgy characters.
I know what you mean then.
There's always a nutcase. Not worried, but I don't want to spoil the funeral, right?
No, I know you.
I'll see you tomorrow.
There were 26 limos. There's the famous picture of the 26 limos going over the Bow flyover. Quite a sad day for Reggie because he wasn't allowed to go into a funeral car with his brother, Charlie. He had to travel behind the horses with the carriage in a prison van, handcuffed in the church. We did ask as soon as he arrived, could he just be unhandcuffed for the service? No, they said.
As Reggie came to the end of his 30-year sentence, his brother Charlie was arrested for conspiracy to supply millions of pounds worth of cocaine. Many believed it was in fact a conspiracy engineered by the authorities to ensure that all three Kray brothers died in jail.
Charlie, I'd been to Durham just before he was put into Parkhurst. I'd been to Durham, and he came out in the orange vest, being a Category A prisoner. And I'd never seen Charlie Kray ever white. Always had that tan, again, always immaculate. And he came out in Durham like white, looking ill. The next thing we knew, he'd been transferred to Parkhurst. There was no reason for that whatsoever. They didn't want two Krays on the street. And I always say the whole sentences were political sentences, but that was a dreadfully sad and probably cruel thing to do to Charlie.
Charlie, to me, was... his name killed Charlie. If he wasn't called Kray, he'd still be alive today. But his name killed Charlie.
Charlie was just a friend with everyone. He was a charmer, a real charming man, and a nice man to be with. He respected everyone, he respected all the staff, being a waiter, a glass collector, bar staff. His manners were impeccable. And he got a bit of pride and a bit of dignity about him.
In August 2000, Reggie Kray was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He had served 32 years in prison, so the Home Secretary granted him compassionate parole. He never did get to walk the streets of the East End again, where he and his twin once ruled. Reggie was transferred to a hotel in Norwich. He couldn't afford to pay for the room, so a friend footed the bill. On his deathbed, he confessed to another murder. Although he didn't name the victim, Leonard Nipper Reid, the detective who arrested the Krays, later confirmed that it was Mad Teddy Smith. Smith was a psychopathic homosexual, rumoured to have had affairs with Ronnie Kray and Tom Dryburgh, the former Labour MP. He disappeared the day after an argument with the Krays in 1967. No doubt Smith ended up with Marks, Mitchell and MCVITIE. On the 1st of October 2000, Reggie died in his sleep. 10 days later, he was buried beside his brother Ronnie.
Reggie, I say, was the saddest funeral, because having married, once I'd refused my 3 proposals from him, he married a lady called Roberta. She was with him 4 years, I think it was, but she changed the whole sequence, and therefore it was sad, because all the old school, his old friends, such as Frank Fraser and Fred, they were just sort of dismissed to a pew in the church. A lot of people that visited Reggie were given short, sharp lessons like, do you want to spend your life like me in here? Like, look what I could have done. He regretted at the end of his life and told me so on several occasions. Ronnie never regretted. He never apologised. He never reformed.
Ronnie Kray may not have had any regrets, but if he had known the truth about those he considered to be his most trusted friends, he may well have had many. That's because those he championed, as loyal and trustworthy until the day he died, were in fact conspiring to murder him and his twin shortly before they were arrested.
He was getting out of control, Ronnie. He was going so far that he couldn't care less. He thought he was untouchable.
I was asked to go over again to see them, and I walked into this bungalow, and there was a fella called Charlie Clark. He was an old cat burglar from years ago, and when I walked in there was a terrible atmosphere, and all the rest of the firm are sitting there, fucking worried out their life. And there's Ronnie Kray pacing up and down in his braces with a cigarette, which is to light it one after the other, and puffing away, marching up like a caged tiger or a lion in a cage, you know. I said, what you got me here for? What's the problem, you know? So he said, it's that Billy Gentry. He said, I'm gonna, you know, I'll get him. I've sent the firm out to pick him up and bring him back. He's gonna do him. I said, what for? What's Billy Gentry done, you know? He's upset me, he did this, he did this. Anyway, all the rest of them, all the committee, they sent out like 4 fellas to go and pick him up and bring him back so that Ronnie could fucking shoot him, you know, or kill him, wherever way was going to do it. And I said, no, I'm so sorry. I said, I can't have it. I said, I'm talking him out of it. I said, I ain't got any facilities to handle this situation anyway. I said, it can't be done. Now forget about it, Ron, and you know, calm down. And of course, I've just got him round to that, where he accepted the fact that he wasn't going to, you know, go through with it. And the fucking doorbell rings, doesn't it? They're back, aren't they? They've come back. I said, all right, let me go. I went down the passage to get to the door first, opened the door, and if Bill Gentry's there, I'm going to push him and say, now fucking leg it, you run, you know, just go. But they was there, there was Donahue and another couple of people, and they come back and they winked at me, they gave me a wink, they went, we couldn't find him, we looked everywhere, we couldn't go into the front, and then Ronnie Kray, did you go down the Widows, did you go down there, where did you look there and look for him and everything? And I thought, so what's he fucking raving mad here, you know? And that was a sort of a very worrying situation then.
When Ronnie Kray sat in the car, he always wanted to sit in the passenger seat. So we just sort of larking about, we said, it'd be so easy, just sit behind him. When you find a nice corner, pop him in the back of the head and chuck him out and let him roll down the bank or something. It would have been so easy.
He wasn't a colonel, he wasn't a boss, he wasn't a leader of men. He was a mass murderer, enjoyed, like a serial killer, he enjoyed what he did. He got a kick out of it.
The thing would have been much better if they fucking ironed out the 2 twins earlier, and it had saved a lot of trouble, and a lot of people wouldn't have gone to prison, and it saved 250 years being dished out at a later date, you know, and people have been alive today. I mean, with people like that topped it, the Billy Gentry thing, you know, when that particular incident, when I reported back to my pals what had happened that night, you know. There's only one thing for it. That's in the Simpsons in the Strand, that took place, discussion.
I'm glad they're 6 foot under the best place they can be. Yeah. They were 2 horrible bastards. You don't hurt your own, but they hurt anybody then.
They were really frightening if you really knew them.
People who say the lovely boys didn't know them.
They were bloody animals.
I thought they should be ironed out, to be honest.
You thought the Krays should have been shot?
The 2 of them, yeah.
Why did you think?
Because they was dangerous to everybody, and if they hadn't been arrested when they were, that's what would have happened.
Long after their deaths, the Krays are still revered by old-time crooks and misguided youngsters from a generation that wasn't even born when they took over the East End of London. More than 32 books and a succession of films have chronicled their reign, and in some cases glorified it. But is there really any glamour in the sexual abuse of young men, the exploitation of innocent members of the public, and the murder of fathers and husbands, simply because there is a facility to dispose of the bodies, and in doing so, play God? The deranged and dysfunctional twins will undoubtedly be remembered for many years to come, but nobody should forget the misery their crimes caused to so many.